Art is human nature.
So, in your opinion, um, what do you think are some of the core causes behind a lot of mental health challenges and even mental health disorders? Because I think this is also an important thing to kind of touch on. But there are mental health disorders that people can be born with, but you can also what's the word I'm looking for? Develop a mental health disorder as well later on in your life. So I guess yeah, for you, what do you think are some like core causes behind these things?
So the first one you touch on, it's biological or genetic. There are certain mental health disorders that people are more likely to develop because somebody in their immediate family has it, and so there's just a higher chance of that. But then there was this study called the Dunedin Longitudinal Study, and it is essentially the longest running study. It studied babies all the way up into midlife. So I think it's, don't quote me on this, but it's been running for like 50 or 75 years. Different researchers have been on the project. And basically what they looked at is key markers in these people's lives. And if anything that happened in their childhood, their genetics, their biology over time changed their outcomes in life. And there's this constant argument about nature versus nurture. And basically what the study found is it's nature and nurture. So there were certain people, for example, who had traits genetically of psychopathy, and so just a general lack of empathy. But one of the people in the study, even though he had those traits and he was adopted, and his biological father was actually in prison, it was serving a lifetime sentence in prison, because he grew up in such a loving, supportive environment with people who encouraged him, gave him the support that he needed. He went on to live a happy life, never engaged in any sort of violent behavior, and ended up being very successful. And so what that study has shown is that it is how you are born, but then it's also the circumstances that you experience throughout your life. One thing that Gabor Mate talks about is how unbelievably important it is in early life to how detrimental stress can be early on in life, and how that can affect you on a biological level, and how that's one of the primary causes, for example, of ADHD, that because if a mother while she is pregnant is experiencing so much stress and turmoil, whether it's actually happening to her or if she's just feeling stress in her own mind, that can have a biological impact on the child, which will carry throughout that person's life. And so there's also that, there's trauma. So if children experience any form of trauma or abuse when they are very young, that can completely change the expression of their genes throughout their lifetime. And so that can have an impact. But one thing that I specifically think that we don't talk about enough when it comes to mental health is the economic conditions of our current society and how they impact people's mental health. Because two of the most common mental health disorders are depression and anxiety. They are the ones that can manifest because people are experiencing high levels of stress, and that can lead to overwhelm and anxiety and so many different other health disorders. And it can further exacerbate existing ones as well. So if you're somebody who struggles with borderline personality disorder or schizophrenia or any other mental health disorder, something like dissociative identity disorder, for example, is triggered by stress. And so stress is a huge common thread throughout all mental health disorders. And that's not to say that people who are wealthy or have a lot of money can't struggle with their mental health, because that's simply just not true. But I would say that unfortunately, poor economic conditions, things like low wages, unaffordable housing, no benefits, no paid sick days, Doug Ford, all of these things contribute to higher levels of stress in people's lives. Because when you're worrying about keeping a roof over your head or feeding your family, or where your next paycheck is coming from, that's going to stress you out. And then it sends you, let's say, into a depressive episode. And then because you're in a poor economic condition and you're also struggling with your mental health, the chances of you pulling yourself out of whatever economic condition you're in goes down immensely. So actually it traps people in these poor economic conditions. And it's something we don't talk about enough, because then we have to hold businesses accountable, we have to hold government accountable, we have to hold developers accountable who are not building enough affordable housing, and they're just basically building these big expensive condos because they want to make money. And it's something that we don't talk about enough. And that's something that I want to talk more about through 2020 Arts, because people aren't homeless because they want to be homeless. People aren't struggling with addiction because they want to struggle with addiction. If we create and we just shift some of the resources from, like, the police, for example, to some of these integral programs and services that help people from an early age and give them the encouragement and support that they need, they are more likely to be more successful in life and feel more fulfilled and have more opportunities. So I just think that there's a misallocation of resources in our country and many countries around the world, and that's a big part of what's causing the mental health crisis.